Hi everybody, welcome back. We're now into the compression lecture, and we're looking at the compressor controls. And the first thing that we want to look at here within the compressor controls is I've got this called up here. This is your compressor built-in logic. You'll find it in the dynamics section. Just call up a compressor, a stereo compressor, and the first one that calls up here is your platinum digital. And we'll get into what all of these are, but the first control that we want to look at within our compressor is the threshold. The threshold determines the level at which the compressor will begin to compress. So for example, a threshold setting of minus 20 dB means the signal above 20 dB will be compressed while the signals below 20 dB will not be compressed. As you can see here, that's usually where logic will get you set up, is minus 20. Now, of course, for many of us, that's going to be a little bit too much. We might want our threshold, a little closer to zero. And what I'll show you here is that as we start with our compressor, if I'm at 0 and if I'm at 1 to 1, you'll find that I'm not compressing at all. That's a good place to start, of course. So with a ratio then, determines the amount of input signal that is needed to cause a 1 dB increase in the compressor's output. So ratio sets the amount of gain reduction. The higher the ratio, the more extreme the compression. So 1 to 1 in this particular case is no compression. 2 to 1 is light compression. 3 to 1 is moderate. 4 to 1 is fairly substantial. 8 to 1, noticeable. And 10 to 1 above can be pretty slammed. And unless we're light on the threshold, we're going to have some problems at this point. So let me show you what happens. If I lower the threshold in this particular case, you can see that signal will not pass this particular point. So again, what's really interesting is if I'm looking at this graph really helps me see this 1 to 1 ratio. And I've got this here also within your notes, and I'll show you exactly how that works. But just very quickly, if you look here, that threshold at 1 to 1 just goes straight diagonal. Now, as I cut into 2 to 1, 4 to 1, or in this particular case, the brick wall limiter, or anything over 10 to 1 essentially being very aggressive, that helped me note exactly how this was working. So if I have, for example, 2 to 1 being light, you can see here the signal is fairly close to that 1 to 1 going straight up diagonal, right? But as I get further up on the line and as I lower that threshold in, you can see that diagonal line is very, very drastic in that case. It's almost horizontal. So of course, in this case then, as we listen through, which is the most important part, you're going to really hear that the compressor sounds very aggressive. It's going to sound, somewhat muddy. The transparency is one that we're going to be training you as, as far as what we're looking at in terms of a more clean sound, essentially. So most importantly, if you're looking to really crunch a signal, we're just definitely telling you there are no rules. As you could see here, that could be a really, and then I'll show you in some examples, that could be a really very aggressive sound, something maybe potentially some of you are looking for. So just going back again to our notes. For example, a compressor with a 4 to 1 ratio will allow 1 dB of gain at the output every 4 dB of gain that the signal crosses the threshold. And I've got this here for you, of course, right? Another example is a compressor with the ratio of 100 to 1. Requires sound to push 100 dB above the threshold for the compressor to just let 1 dB through. So basically, the sound can never get louder than the threshold. That's called the brick wall limiting. And as you can see here in the case of logic, logic only allows us to get to 30 to 1. But in that case, if I'm using this, this is definitely a brick wall. 30 dB over that signal, I mean, you're screaming, of course, right? This is the diagram that I was just showing you. And another great way to look at this is, here with this ratio chart, you could see, a 1 to 1 to 2 to 1, 4 to 1, 8 to 1, 12 to 1, 20 to 1 ratio, and exactly what happens to the signal and the actual signal, and then what happens to the compressed signal versus original signal. So on top of these controls, another control that we're looking at is the makeup gain. added to the output of the compressor in order to make up for the gain that's lost when the signal is compressed, because of course as we use these controls, we expect we are going to lose some signal, of course, because we're taking some away, as you could see in this chart. Even with the least drastic ratio at 2 to 1 or even 4 to 1, we're still going to be losing some level, right? The attack, as you can see here on the bottom of the compressor, attack and also release. Think of that as your envelope, for example. It determines how quickly or slowly the compressor compresses sound after it crosses the threshold. So we can really push and pull certain transients or make a bass line sound longer, or let's say, for example, if we wanted a really tight snare, we could have a fast attack and we could have an open release, for example. But in the case of attack, determining how quickly or slowly the compressor compresses the sound after it crosses the threshold. So a fast attack, small numbers; a slow attack lets the transients pass. So in this particular case, fast attack or slow attack. And this can be wonderful for, again, snare sounds, guitar sounds. You can really, open up the tone within just changing the attack. Another really beautiful aspect, and I find this a magic trick for basses and kick drums, is release. The release determines how long the compressor will take to return to a compressed signal and to its original volume after it's been compressed. So slow release is large numbers and fast release is small numbers. And so in this case, you could see here, if I wanted to, really open up that release, I could. But I do think of it just like I would think of it as a synthesizer. This really helps me shape the envelope of a sound. So a compressor is a wonderful tool. Think of it for vocals too. I mean, if you took this away as far as, as when I'm mixing vocals, for example, I would be lost. I love what I can do here within the attack and release points of this compressor. You can find it's very, very powerful. So as we continue on here then, some mixing techniques that we've got here to create transparent compression. So first and foremost, we want to select the ratio that's appropriate for the signal. So 2 to 1 to 4 to 1 is probably a good place to start. And so in this particular case, then if I just go back, I'm using this Jazzy drum set 05. And so just a very simple drum set. And as you can see here, I've got my threshold as I could lower that back. We're going to start, in this case, at, let's say, 10 to 20 dB back. My ratio, I'm going to put, somewhere in between 2 to 4 to 1. So I'll just put it to 3, and that's in that case. And then one of the things that we really do want to make sure is that we shut off auto gain. So this means that we're automatically letting that release point, work. In this case, we want to be able to use our ear. So let's shut that off. And so now we're actually using the compressor without any help, essentially, right? So in this case, then, we're going to lower that threshold as we just did, as we could see that signal is going to go through. So I'm going to just call up that simple jazz drum set. We'll play that through here. Now, I'm using, as you can see here, I'm using the graph. And that graph is allowing me to see exactly what's happening as I'm lowering, the threshold, and also within the ratio that I've picked. And so in this particular case, if I take that threshold and lower it down, you can see I'm really going to take that signal and lose it. And listen to how muddy and crunchy this sounds. Now let me bring that threshold back up, and you'll see it's going to sound a lot more pure. And that's what we were talking about as far as transparency. One of the things that I like to do is just, lightly utilize it. So I might be somewhere in between maybe 5, maybe 6, or as, let's just say as a rule of thumb, very close to 0, hardly utilizing it. As you can see here, my threshold is almost at that 1 to 1 point, but it sounds like a drum kit, of course. So a nice little trick for you then is just to be very, very careful. If we lower our threshold too much, we're really going to duck that signal inside the compressor, and it's going to be, a little bit too much for you. You're really going to find that it's going to, it's going to be hard to get, a nice mix that way. I think that for many of you, you're going to find that's going to be the magic trick. Keeping your threshold as close to 0 as possible, while just getting that signal to duck in, of course, and then having that ratio anywhere from 2 to 4 to 1. Don't go, and overdo it here. 2 to 4 to 1, and you're going to get a really nice tonality. We can also adjust the attack time until the attack of the instrument sounds as natural as possible. And we can also adjust the release time until the decay of the instrument is as natural as possible. So once that's all said and done, and I'm utilizing that threshold, let's say maybe potentially over compressing it, now I might be able to actually see what we can do as we raise that threshold and get a nice pure tone. Let me show you what happens here. You see there I just got a nice little attack time, a nice release time, but I was just kind of just looking for the heart of the track in itself, and really every single track that you work with, every oscillator that you work with, it doesn't matter. You're going to find that there's going to be the heart of that particular track, and in that sense you really do want to roll through it and use your ears in this particular case. And of course, obviously in this hopefully you're using something more than headphones potentially, but in that sense, just imagine then being able to listen through really nice monitors and to be able to really fine tune your attack points, your release points, and then of course, most importantly, exactly what's happening with your ratio and your threshold. So check it out. So if I bypass back and forth, and as you'll see here up on the top left-hand corner, I'll just go back and forth. There's your bypass. And on. I think you find that it really does help the transients, it helps the low end, it helps the presence, and most importantly, it definitely takes away some of the picks that we have within our amplitude levels, and it brings out some of the things that weren't being brought out before. It's really wonderful, and again, this is just very simple tricks, making sure the threshold is as close to 0 as possible, and then don't overdoing it on your ratio. Easy enough. And obviously we've just adjusted our attack and also our release times. So now the most important part is when we raised that threshold, you could see then, now I have access to being able to turn that up or turn that down within our makeup gain. So your compressor, now you have total control over this, and it's very, very easy to use. And you'll find that now this is just the beginnings of this, but now that we can actually utilize this professionally and not, totally hurt our signal and squash our signal, now let's start looking at Logic's built-in compressor emulations. The first one that we were looking at is what they call Platinum Digital. So this is Logic's built-in compressor emulations. And Logic's compressor emulates 7 different circuit types. And this is Logic's native digital compressor. It has a very transparent sound, and the transient response is clean and fast. And so as far as usage, the Platinum Digital works great on almost any sound, and that's the one that I've got here for you. That's the one we just used. Now, on top of that, I've got the Studio VCA. The VCA, which stands for Voltage Controlled Amplifier, is an emulation of the Focusrite Red 3 dual compressor limiter. The Focusrite is famous for its ability to maintain a natural sound even when pushing the compressor. It's very clean and doesn't color the sound like other compressors. So the Studio VCA model works great on the mix bus as well as bass, vocals, guitars because of its fast and tight response. So how do I access this? Well, if you look up here on this top row, I can just click between all of these. And then, of course, as you can see here, that Studio VCA, that's that Focusrite, the Red 3. The Red 3's history, the Red 3 is a dual mono stereo compressor limiter that hit the markets in 1994. It features a single VCA design to achieve high quality and truly independent compression and limiting. Its success earned the Red 3 a Tech Award for Outstanding Technical Achievement in the Signal Processing Technology category, and to this day, it remains among Focusrite's most prosperous and recognizable hardware products. It's also the choice compressor for many of the world's finest mix engineers, such as Chris Lord-Alge, who religiously places his Red 3 on the mix bus. He says, "I always put finished stereo mixes through the Focusrite. It pulls the mix together a bit." He says he calls it kissing the Focusrite. On top of that, we also have the Studio FET, which stands for Field Effect Transistor. The Studio FET emulates the URI, or Universal Audio's 1176. This is renowned for lending its character and punch to some of the greatest recordings in history. The 1176 is a favorite among producers and engineers. Its fast attack and release times are perfect for drums, bass, guitars, and bringing vocals to the front of the mix. The Studio FET's aggressive sound delivers a sense of energy that adds brightness and presence to anything that runs through it. And when driven hard, it adds definitely the in-your-face edge that you definitely want for drums, for guitars, for basses, synths, all the way down the line. And that's what a hardware version will look like. But as you can see here up on the top, they also give you a version of that compressor. And so if you're looking for that really, really punchy vocal, you've got it. You're looking for, really in-your-face drum sounds, you've got it right there for you. The Studio FET, simulating the 1176. As you can see here, there's your design, of course. Universal Audio founder Bill Putnam designed the original 1176 in 1967. The first revision represented a breakthrough in limiter technology because it was the first true peak limiter to feature all transistor circuitry and ultra-fast FET gain reduction. The design of the unit also went through numerous changes over the decades, and so the revision E Blackface earned the low noise badge after URI's Brad Plunkett lowered the noise level, increased linearity, and made other changes. So very quickly then, as you can see here, the knobs, a lot of the aspects of the original, they look very similar. Isn't that cool? Continuing on, you get the classic VCA. The classic VCA voltage control amplifier emulates the DBX 160 line of compressor limiter, famous for its vintage character, aggressive punch, and simplicity. The compressor's tight and fast response makes it a perfect tool for crushing groups and buses and injecting subtle fatness to everything from guitars to vocals. Huge for hip-hop artists. Use the classic VCA to inject warmth and grainy punch to your sounds. It's highly effective for beefing up bass, synths, guitars, especially drums. And so, very quickly then, here's our DBX. And as you can see here, very similar knobs, right? This is the DBX 160, the actual hardware. You actually find them, they're not that expensive, about $1,000 or so. And you can see here very simple controls. If we're going back to some of these, we definitely have access to our attack and our release points and some of these other compressors that we were picking before. Interestingly enough, though, that DBX doesn't have that because it doesn't have it on the original unit. Interesting, right? So the history of the DBX, introduced in 1971, the fast-acting, ultra-musical DBX 160 lended a hand on almost every major recording in the late 70s and throughout the 80s. Later models in the 160 series also became industry standards, still widely used today. The DBX 160 is legendary for its simple control set, classic hard knee compression, and non-linearities, and not found in other VCA compressors. The DBX 160 is legendary for its simple control set, classic hard knee compression, and non-linearities not found in other VCA compressors. The vintage VCA. The vintage VCA model emulates the legendary SSL G-Bus compressor. Based on the Master Bus Center compressor of the SSL 4000G console, the SSL G-Bus compressor excels at making mixes bigger, more powerful, and punchy, while enhancing cohesion and clarity. For many, it was kind of unattainium because, of course, you had to buy this particular console. And you can see here I've got this center. That's the compressor in the middle, but all of these channels were sent by way of a bus. You just, twist a little knob here, and then you'd be sending the signal into that compressor, and then you'd be able to use that. But you had to have the console in order to utilize this particular compressor. Later on, they gave us access through 500 series, and that really changed the game for us. So we didn't have to buy a console now. We could just buy a very simple power supply, and for a few $1,000 instead of having to spend tens of thousands, we could actually use this glue. Prized by top engineers for its ability to glue together tracks, the SSL G-Bus compressor is ideal for adding punch to drums, percussion, helping shape piano dynamics. It's Fame is its character on bus tracks, especially the master bus. It's huge. It's on tons and tons of tracks. Load the vintage VCA on your master and hear your mix come alive for sure. The history. The SSL-G Comp 500 series compressor and the SSL-G series compressor rack mount unit, and this is one that you can buy again for just a few $1,000, are considered to be the holy grail bus compressor. The SSL-G has transformed music recording since its introduction in the 80s. This celebrated compressor is famous for its ability to make a mix louder, punchier, while imparting a modern-sounding cohesiveness, and has shaped the sound of more hit records than any other since its inception. From subtle and transparent dynamic control to more aggressive textures with peak limiting, the SSL-G's intuitive control lets you quickly dial in what you need. And showing you here, there she is. The vintage FET. This is the Yuri 1176 Revision H, which is also called the Silver Face. It is also famous for lending its character and punch to some of the greatest recordings in history. It's become an essential tool in almost every professional studio that I've been in for sure. Its fast attack and release times are ideal for drums, bass, and guitars. Very, very similar to the 1176, the black face that we just saw. The vintage FET's aggressive sound delivers a sense of energy that adds brightness and presence to anything that runs through it. So when you drive it very hard, it can add some desired edge to your drums for sure. As you can see here, it's the Silver Face. So the history behind that, Bill Putnam designed the original 1176 in 1967, as we just saw, and the first revision was the breakthrough, of course. We just looked at that, right? This particular revision 8 retains much of the signature sound from its predecessors. The biggest difference is the silver plate, a red off button, and the blue Yuri logo. And many people will find that the subtleties and the differences between these and all of these different revisions really makes these compressors sought after. Now last is the vintage Opto. This one is emulating the Teletronics LA2A, which is a really, really wonderful piece of gear, one of my favorite. It's one that we're looking at that actually utilizes tubes. For over 50 years, the LA2A has been revered for its smooth, natural musical compression. Top artists, engineers, producers prize its ability to work its magic on anything that you throw at it. It's famous for treating vocals, and it is really difficult to make this thing sound bad. When you run basses through it, it's really, truly a magic trick. The vintage Opto has some personality and subtle, transparent compression, or push it hard to introduce sizzling overdrive that sounds amazing on almost everything. The history behind it, first introduced in 1965 as the leveling amp, and fast became a studio staple heard on countless hit records. Famous for subtle, warm qualities, the original LA2A tube-driven electro-optical attenuation circuit was revolutionary for its time. Also, its fast attack and two-stage release offers a characteristic more transparent than all the compressors of its day. The Teletronics founder Jim Lawrence first used photocells for controlling an audio gain in an innovative way. His ingenious optical compression design was a technological breakthrough, far surpassing the stability and transparency of earlier circuits. Universal Audio founder Bill Putnam later purchased this patented technology and continued to manufacture the LA2A until 1969. So the Logic's compressor emulations react differently on each different circuit type. So the whole point of us understanding the different history is that we want to be able to use these in different ways. And so as we found, some of these might be wonderful on our mix bus, for example, the SSL, or maybe potentially some of these will be wonderful for a vocal, like our 1176. Knowing that, we're going to want to study exactly how to utilize these. So looking at distortion, then. Distortion is the key to the compressor's analog modeling. By enabling it, Logic simulates characteristics of the various analog compressors. So what we're looking at here is the distortion on this side to the right. Once that's set to soft, now we're actually simulating the algorithm of those devices. If this is off, these devices will all sound very, very similar. So be careful. Make sure the distortion level is set to soft, and you'll be good to go. It's really that easy. The character that analog gear adds to a track is basically noise. Analog compressors, tape machines, preamps generally have some degree that can shape our tracks in very, very amazing ways. The Logic compressor lets you decide if you'd like to add the subtle sound of this analog modeling distortion to your tracks. You can utilize it in three ways. You've got soft, which is what I recommend. Hard, which is the same thing. I'll let you try it. It's as if you like it as you're working with the track. There is no rule, of course. And then clip, which is the most subtle way to utilize it. And I definitely, one more time, I would recommend utilizing soft. Each setting adds its own color, and just by introducing some distortion, you can really shape the tone of your track. So again, if you want to utilize each one of these compressors that you've just studied so that they sound a certain way, make sure that that distortion is set to soft. Next up, your makeup gain. When you use a compressor, your goal is to compress your track. So as you attenuate, ratio, threshold, attack, and release, just like you've been trained to do, your track's volume is definitely going to change. Sometimes compressors cause your tracks to get louder. Other times it causes them to get quieter. And this can be a problem because at some point you'll compare your track before and after your compressor. So note, compressor's makeup gain comes before the distortion. So while the output gain comes after everything the particular compressor does. So your makeup gain set here, I can turn up or down that signal. But remember, we also have our output gain on this side. So I could also turn up or down that signal. So couldn't I make a push or a pull? I could really send that signal into the output gain, and I could set that output and turn it down. Of course, that might not necessarily sound good, but if you really wanted to crunch something, you could. Here's a drums example, for example. Try this. Set your distortion to soft. Turn up the makeup gain gradually. And then adjust the output as needed. And I think what you'll find is you may not need to. Most of you are going to be set to unity gain in this particular case, right? I think you'll find you'll probably be good to go in that setting, no problem. But what I like to do is just subtly utilize my makeup gain after I've set all of my controls. And then I can start looking at my output gain and see exactly where we can go from there. As the makeup gain gets louder, your track will get more and more distorted. And that's the goal of using an analog compressor, right? You're able to use this analog circuit to shape your track's timbre in very beautiful ways. This usage of the makeup gain and mix output gain can make the emulation of the compressor really come to life. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks again, everybody.